Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the downtown hotel bar, each drop racing down the sleek surface like tiny rivers of silver. Inside, warm amber lights cast a golden glow over polished mahogany tables and leather bar stools, while soft jazz music drifted through the air, mixing with the quiet murmur of conversation. It was the kind of place where strangers came to forget their troubles, if only for a night. Emma Collins sat alone at the bar, her fingers wrapped around a glass of red wine, watching the liquid swirl as she tilted it slightly. She had never been the type to sit in hotel bars on a Friday night. In fact, she had never been the type to do anything remotely spontaneous. But tonight was different. Tonight, she needed to escape. Her navy blue dress hugged her figure modestly, professional yet elegant, the kind of outfit that spoke of a woman who had somewhere important to be. But she didn't. Not anymore. The conference had ended hours ago, and her colleagues had all rushed back to their rooms or caught flights home. Emma had chosen to stay, to sit, to breathe. Teaching English literature to 8th graders was fulfilling, but lately it had felt suffocating. The same lesson plans, the same parent-teacher meetings, the same predictable routine. At 32, she sometimes wondered if this was all there was. A life measured in semesters and summer breaks. She took another sip of wine, letting the warmth slide down her throat. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes, offered her a polite smile as he wiped down the counter. She returned it briefly before her gaze drifted back to the rain. That's when she noticed him. He sat 3 seats down, his presence quiet yet impossible to ignore. Dark hair, slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it one too many times. A tailored black shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His jaw was sharp, his expression distant, and his eyes, a striking shade of gray, stared at the glass of whiskey in his hand, as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. He looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally, the kind of tired that came from carrying too much weight for too long. Emma shouldn't have stared, but she couldn't help it. There was something magnetic about him, something raw and unguarded in a way that felt rare. He must have sensed her gaze because he turned his head slightly, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. Then, the corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest hint of a smile. It wasn't flirtatious. It was knowing, as if he recognized something in her that mirrored what he felt. He raised his glass slightly in a silent toast. Emma felt her cheeks flush, but she lifted her own glass in return. Her heart beat a little faster. A minute passed. Maybe 2. Then, he stood, picked up his drink, and walked over. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and smooth, tinged with a quiet confidence. "Is this seat taken?" Emma blinked, glancing at the empty stool beside her. "No, it's all yours." He sat down, setting his glass on the bar with a soft clink. Up close, he was even more striking. The faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his shirt fit perfectly across his shoulders, the subtle scent of sandalwood and rain that clung to him. "You look like someone who's thinking too much," he said, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Emma let out a quiet laugh, surprised by his directness. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged. "Takes one to know one." She tilted her head, curiosity sparking. "Rough day?" "Rough year," he corrected, then took a slow sip of his whiskey. "You?" "Rough life," she said before she could stop herself. Then she laughed again, shaking her head. "Sorry. That sounded more dramatic than I intended." He smiled, a real one this time, and it transformed his face entirely. "No, I get it. Sometimes it feels like that." They fell into conversation easily. the way strangers sometimes do when there's no history to navigate, no expectations to uphold. He told her he worked in business, something vague about investments and contracts that she didn't press him on. She told him she was a teacher, that she loved her students, but sometimes felt invisible in her own life. He listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel seen. An hour passed, then another. The bar grew quieter as guests trickled out, heading to their rooms or into the rainy night. But Emma and the stranger, whose name she still didn't know, stayed. At some point, his hand brushed hers on the bar, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity up her arm. She looked at him, and the air between them shifted. Charged. "I don't usually do this," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the music. "Neither do I," he replied, his gaze locked on hers. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel bold and reckless and alive. She didn't think. She just acted. She leaned in, and so did he. And when their lips met, it was like the world fell away. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, as if they were both testing the waters. But then it deepened, and suddenly Emma didn't care about routines or responsibilities or what tomorrow might bring. She only cared about this moment, about him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he whispered, "Come upstairs with me." It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation, one she could refuse. But she didn't want to. For once in her life, Emma Collins wanted to do something just for herself. She nodded. They left the bar together, hands intertwined, hearts pounding. The elevator ride was silent but electric, the tension between them almost unbearable. When the doors opened on the 10th floor, he led her down the hallway to his suite. The door closed behind them, and the rest of the world disappeared. Emma woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through sheer curtains, painting the hotel room in shades of pale gold and gray. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the warmth beside her stirred, and everything came rushing back. She turned her head slowly, her breath catching. He was still asleep, his face relaxed, the hard lines softened by rest. One arm was draped across his chest, the other stretched out toward her. The sheets were tangled around their waists, and Emma felt a flush rise to her cheeks as memories of the night before flooded her mind. It had been passionate, intense, and completely unexpected. She had never done anything like this before, never spent the night with a stranger, never let herself be so vulnerable, so free. And now, in the quiet light of morning, reality began to creep in. What was she doing? She didn't even know his name. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Emma slipped out of bed. Her dress lay crumpled on the floor near the window, and she gathered it quickly, her hands trembling slightly. She dressed in silence, her heart pounding, torn between the desire to stay and the overwhelming urge to run. This wasn't her. This wasn't who she was. She was Emma Collins, responsible, predictable, safe. Not the kind of woman who had one-night stands with mysterious strangers in hotel rooms. She glanced back at him one last time. He looked peaceful, almost vulnerable in his sleep. A pang of something she couldn't quite name tugged at her chest. Regret? Longing? She wasn't sure. But she couldn't stay. Without a word, without a note, Emma slipped out of the room and into the hallway. The hotel was still quiet, only a few early risers moving about. She kept her head down as she hurried to the elevator, her mind racing. By the time she reached the lobby, she felt like she could breathe again. The cool morning air hit her as she stepped outside, and she inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. It was just one night, she told herself. One night that no one ever has to know about. She hailed a cab and gave the driver her address, leaning back against the seat as the city blurred past the window. She told herself she'd forget about him, about the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd touched her, the way he'd made her feel alive. But deep down, she knew that was a lie. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in front of her 8th grade classroom, chalk in hand, writing vocabulary words on the board. Her students were settling into their seats, chattering about weekend plans and the upcoming school dance. It was a typical Monday morning, and Emma had almost convinced herself that the night at the hotel had been a dream. Almost. "All right, everyone, settle down," she said, turning to face the class with a warm smile. "Today we're starting a new unit on classic literature. I know some of you are groaning already, but trust me, these stories have stood the test of time for a reason." A few students laughed, and Emma felt herself relax into the familiar rhythm of teaching. This was her world, safe, predictable, controllable. "Miss Collins?" a voice called from the back. Emma looked up. "Yes, Sarah?" "There's a new student joining us today. He's waiting outside." Emma blinked. A new student? In the middle of the semester? That was unusual. She nodded. "Of course. Send him in." The door opened, and a boy stepped inside. He looked about 13, tall for his age, with dark hair and striking gray eyes that seemed far too serious for someone so young. He wore the standard school uniform, a navy blazer and khaki pants, and carried a leather backpack over one shoulder. Emma's breath caught. Those eyes. She knew those eyes. "Everyone, this is our new student." The principal's voice came from the doorway. Emma hadn't even noticed Mrs. Henderson standing there. "This is Daniel Westwood. He's just moved here from New York, so let's all make him feel welcome." Daniel. The name echoed in Emma's mind as the boy gave a polite nod to the class and made his way to an empty seat near the window. Her heart was racing, but she forced herself to smile, to appear calm. "Welcome, Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "We're happy to have you." He met her gaze briefly, and for a split second, Emma thought she saw something flicker in his expression. But then it was gone, replaced by the neutral mask of a teenager trying to fit in. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Emma went through the motions, discussing themes and character development, but her mind was elsewhere. Those eyes, that face, it couldn't be a coincidence. When the bell finally rang, the students filed out, chattering and laughing. Daniel was one of the last to leave, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. As he passed her desk, he paused. "Thanks, Miss Collins," he said quietly. Emma looked up, her throat tight. "You're welcome, Daniel." He left, and Emma sat down heavily in her chair, her hands shaking. It couldn't be. Could it? That afternoon, Emma was gathering her things when there was a knock on her classroom door. She looked up, expecting a student or another teacher. Instead, her heart stopped. He stood in the doorway. The man from the hotel. The stranger who had consumed her thoughts for 3 weeks. Except now he wasn't a stranger. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, and those gray eyes, the same ones she'd seen in Daniel, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice smooth and maddeningly familiar. "I'm Alexander Westwood, Daniel's father." Emma's world tilted. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Alexander stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his jaw, a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition, surprise, and something else. "I believe we've met before," he said quietly. Emma's face burned. She wanted to deny it, to pretend she had no idea what he was talking about. But she couldn't. The truth was written all over her face. "That was you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know you were a teacher, or that you'd be my son's teacher. Emma's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. I think, she said, her voice shaking, we need to talk. The silence in the classroom was suffocating. Emma stood frozen behind her desk, her fingers gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. Alexander Westwood stood a few feet away, his hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored suit, his expression carefully controlled. But his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, betrayed him. They held shock, yes, but also something deeper. Something that made Emma's pulse race in a way she desperately wished it wouldn't. This can't be real, Emma finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. Believe me, I'm just as stunned as you are. Emma let out a shaky laugh, though there was no humor in it. Stunned? That's one way to put it. She turned away from him, pressing her palms against the cool surface of her desk, trying to steady herself. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since that night, and she had convinced herself she'd never see him again, that he was just a beautiful mistake, a moment of recklessness she could tuck away and forget. But now he was here, in her classroom, as the father of one of her students. I didn't plan this, Alexander said quietly, his voice low and steady. I didn't know you worked here. I didn't even know your last name. Emma turned to face him, her eyes flashing. And that makes it better? She dropped her voice, glancing toward the door to make sure no one was nearby. We spent the night together. And now she gestured helplessly. You're a parent at my school. Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is? His jaw tightened. I'm aware. Emma shook her head, disbelief and frustration warring inside her. Why didn't you tell me you had a son? Why didn't you mention anything about your life? Alexander's gaze hardened slightly. You didn't ask. And if I recall correctly, you didn't exactly volunteer much about yourself either. It was supposed to be just one night. No names, no complications. Emma flinched. He was right, of course. That night, neither of them had wanted to be anything more than strangers seeking escape. But now, standing in the harsh light of her classroom, the consequences of that choice were staring them both in the face. So what do we do now? Emma asked, her voice quieter, more vulnerable. Alexander stepped closer, and Emma's breath hitched. Even now, even in the midst of this disaster, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. The same pull that had drawn her to him in that hotel bar. We do nothing, he said firmly. What happened between us stays between us. No one needs to know. Emma's stomach twisted. You want to just pretend it never happened? Alexander's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained resolute. For Daniel's sake, yes. He's been through enough. He just lost his mother 6 months ago, and moving here, starting at a new school, it's been hard on him. The last thing he needs is any kind of scandal involving his teacher. Emma felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Your wife, she whispered. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Alexander's eyes darkened with grief. Ex-wife. We divorced 2 years ago, but we co-parented. She was, he paused, his voice thick. She was a good mother. Daniel's still grieving. Emma's heart ached, both for the boy she'd only just met and for the man standing before her. I understand, she said softly. I won't say anything. I promise. Alexander nodded, relief flickering across his features. Thank you. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Then Alexander cleared his throat, straightening his posture, slipping back into the role of the composed, powerful businessman. "I should go," he said, "but I'll be involved in Daniel's education, parent-teacher conferences, school events, that sort of thing. We'll need to," he hesitated, "figure out how to navigate this." Emma nodded, though the thought of seeing him regularly, of pretending there was nothing between them, felt impossible. "We'll manage." Alexander's gaze lingered on her for a beat longer than necessary, and Emma saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? Longing? She couldn't be sure. Then he turned and walked toward the door. "Miss Collins," he said, pausing with his hand on the doorknob. "For what it's worth, I haven't stopped thinking about that night." Emma's heart stuttered. Before she could respond, he was gone. She sank into her chair, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. This was a disaster. An absolute disaster. But as much as she wanted to hate the situation, as much as she knew she should put distance between herself and Alexander Westwood, a small, traitorous part of her couldn't stop replaying his last words. I haven't stopped thinking about that night. Neither had she. Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into her work, determined to maintain professionalism and distance. Daniel Westwood was a quiet, intelligent student who kept mostly to himself. He completed his assignments diligently, participated when called upon, but never volunteered more than necessary. Emma watched him carefully, not just as a teacher, but with the added weight of knowing his father, knowing the loss he'd endured. She wanted to reach out, to help him feel more comfortable, but she also worried that any extra attention might seem suspicious. And then there was Alexander. True to his word, he became a presence at the school. He attended the parent-teacher mixer, the fall festival, the school fundraiser. Every time Emma saw him, her heart raced, her palms grew damp, and she had to fight the urge to look away, or worse, to stare. He was always polite, always appropriate, but there were moments, brief, stolen glances, a lingering handshake, a smile that lasted just a second too long, that made it clear he was struggling just as much as she was. One evening, after a particularly long parent-teacher conference night, Emma was packing up her things when Alexander appeared in her doorway. She looked up, startled. "Mr. Westwood, I thought you'd left." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Emma's pulse quickened. "I wanted to talk to you," he said. "About Daniel." "Of course." Emma set down her bag, folding her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. "How can I help?" Alexander leaned against the desk, his expression serious. "He's been withdrawn lately, more than usual. I know he's still grieving, but I can't help feeling like there's something else. Have you noticed anything?" Emma hesitated. Daniel was a good student, but Alexander was right. There was a sadness in the boy that went beyond typical teenage moodiness. "He doesn't interact much with the other students," Emma said carefully. "He's polite, respectful, but he keeps to himself. Have you tried talking to him?" Alexander let out a bitter laugh. "I've tried, but he doesn't open up to me. Not anymore." Emma's heart ached for him, for both of them. "Grief is complicated," she said softly, "especially at his age. Maybe he just needs time." Alexander nodded, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and the air between them shifted. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he said quietly. "Seeing you. Pretending." Emma swallowed hard. "I know." Neither of them moved. The silence stretched, charged with everything they weren't saying. Then Alexander stepped closer. "Emma," he began, his voice rough. "We shouldn't," Emma whispered. But even as she said it, she didn't step back. Alexander's hand lifted, his fingers brushing a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was gentle, achingly tender, and Emma's breath caught. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. tell me to walk away. But Emma couldn't, because the truth was, she didn't want him to. Emma's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Alexander could hear it. His hand lingered near her cheek, his fingers barely grazing her skin, yet the touch sent a shiver down her spine. The classroom, usually a place of safety and routine, suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls closing in around them. "This is a mistake," Emma whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Alexander's gaze dropped to her lips. "I know." But neither of them moved. The tension between them was unbearable, a live wire crackling with electricity. Emma knew she should step back, should remind him, and herself, of all the reasons this was wrong. He was a parent. She was a teacher. His son was her student. But the memory of that night at the hotel, the way he'd made her feel alive, desired, seen, was too powerful to ignore. Just as Alexander leaned in, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. They sprang apart as if burned. Emma turning quickly toward the window, her cheeks flushed, while Alexander straightened his tie, his expression carefully neutral. A janitor appeared in the doorway, pushing a trash cart. "Evening, Miss Collins. Mr. Westwood." "Evening," Emma said, her voice higher than usual. The janitor nodded and moved on. Emma exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. That was close. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Emma, we can't keep doing this." "I know," she said, turning to face him. "We can't. We won't. This ends now." He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching hers. Then he nodded. "You're right." He moved toward the door, but paused, glancing back. "For what it's worth, you're an incredible teacher. Daniel's lucky to have you." Before Emma could respond, he was gone. She stood alone in the empty classroom, her heart aching with a longing she had no right to feel. The next few weeks passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Emma focused on her students, on lesson plans and grading papers, anything to keep her mind off Alexander Westwood. But it was impossible to ignore him completely. He attended every school event, always polite, always respectful. But there was a distance between them now, a carefully maintained wall that neither dared to breach. Daniel, meanwhile, remained quiet and withdrawn. Emma tried to engage him, to draw him out, but he resisted her efforts. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was struggling with more than just grief, but every time she tried to reach out, he pulled further away. Then, one afternoon in late October, everything changed. Emma was in her classroom, reviewing essays, when Daniel appeared in the doorway. He looked hesitant, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression troubled. "Miss Collins?" Emma looked up, surprised. "Daniel. Is everything okay?" He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Can I talk to you? About something personal?" Emma's heart clenched. "Of course. Come in. Sit down." He closed the door and took a seat at one of the desks near the front. For a moment he didn't speak, his gaze fixed on his hands. "I know my dad's been coming to all the school events," Daniel said finally, his voice quiet. Emma nodded, unsure where this was going. "He has. He's very involved in your education." Daniel looked up, and Emma was startled by the sharpness in his gray eyes, so much like his father's. He's not usually like that. He's always busy with work, but lately he's been different. Emma's stomach twisted. Different how? Daniel hesitated. "I don't know. Distracted, maybe." Or, he paused, like he's trying too hard. "He asked me the other day if I liked you. As a teacher, I mean." Emma's pulse quickened. "What did you say?" "I said you're fine, you're nice." But then he got this weird look on his face, like Daniel trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind. It's probably nothing." Emma forced a smile, though her mind was racing. "Your dad cares about you, Daniel. He wants to make sure you're settling in okay." "Yeah, maybe." Daniel stood, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "Thanks for listening, Miss Collins." "Of course. Anytime." After he left, Emma sat back in her chair, her thoughts spinning. Did Daniel suspect something? Had Alexander let something slip? She needed to talk to Alexander to make sure they were on the same page. But reaching out to him felt dangerous, like opening a door she'd worked so hard to keep closed. That evening, Emma was at home, grading papers and trying to distract herself, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Emma." It was Alexander. Her heart skipped. "How did you get my number?" "From the school directory." He paused. "I need to see you." Emma's grip tightened on the phone. "Alexander, we agreed. I know what we agreed." But Daniel said something today that he broke off, clearly frustrated. "Please, just meet me. Somewhere private." Emma closed her eyes, knowing she should say no. But the urgency in his voice, the worry, made her relent. "Fine." "Where?" "There's a coffee shop on Westlake Avenue. The quiet one, not the chain. Can you be there in an hour?" "I'll be there." An hour later, Emma walked into the small, dimly lit coffee shop. It was nearly empty. Just a couple of students studying in the corner and a barista wiping down the counter. Alexander was seated at a table in the back, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He stood when he saw her, his expression tense. "Thank you for coming." Emma sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "What did Daniel say?" Alexander leaned forward, his voice low. "He asked me if I was seeing someone I was trying to hide." Emma's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" Alexander dragged a hand over his face. "I told him no. But he didn't believe me. He said I've been acting strange, distracted." "Emma, he's smart. If we're not careful, he's going to figure it out." Emma's stomach churned. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. "We haven't done anything," she said, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The tension between them, the stolen glances, the almost kiss in her classroom, it was all there, simmering beneath the surface. "Not yet," Alexander said quietly. "But if we keep seeing each other, even in professional settings, it's only a matter of time before someone notices." Emma met his gaze, and the longing in his eyes mirrored her own. "So what do we do?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The touch was warm, solid, and entirely too comforting. "We stop pretending," he said. Emma's heart raced. "What?" Alexander's grip tightened. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, Emma. Not since that night. And not since I found out who you are. I know, this is complicated. I know it's messy. But I can't keep lying to myself. Or to you." Emma's throat tightened. "Alexander, this is impossible. You're Daniel's father. I'm his teacher." We can't ignore this," he interrupted. "Whatever this is between us, it's not going away. And maybe, just maybe, we owe it to ourselves to figure out what it could be." Emma stared at him, torn between reason and the overwhelming pull of her heart. "This could ruin everything," she whispered. "I know," Alexander said. "But I think not trying would ruin me." The weight of his words settled over her, and Emma realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could walk away, protect her career, her reputation, and live with the regret. Or she could take a leap of faith, consequences be damned. She took a shaky breath. "Okay." Alexander's eyes widened. "Okay?" Emma nodded, her heart pounding. "Okay. Let's figure this out." A slow smile spread across Alexander's face, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a flicker of hope. The decision hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Emma had just agreed to something that could upend her entire life, and yet, as she sat across from Alexander in the dim glow of the coffee shop, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not yet. "But we have to be smart about this," Emma said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We can't let Daniel find out. Not until, if, we figure out what this is." Alexander nodded, his expression serious. "Agreed. We'll keep everything separate. No meetings at the school unless it's purely professional. No lingering glances, no slip-ups." Emma bit her lip. "And what about us? Where do we even start?" Alexander's gaze softened. "How about dinner? Tomorrow night. Just us. No pretense." Emma hesitated, then smiled. "Okay. Dinner." The next evening, Emma stood in front of her closet, staring at her wardrobe with a mix of anxiety and excitement. What did one wear to a secret dinner with the father of one of her students? A man she'd already slept with, but barely knew? She settled on a simple emerald green dress, elegant but not overly formal, and paired it with low heels. As she checked her reflection, her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "I'll pick you up at 7. The restaurant is private. No one will see us." Emma exhaled slowly. This was really happening. At precisely 7, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment. Alexander stepped out, dressed in dark jeans and a fitted charcoal sweater that made him look less like a businessman and more like a man she could actually imagine herself with. "You look beautiful," he said as she approached. "Thank you." "You look," she paused, searching for the right word. "Human." He laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound. "I'll take that as a compliment." The restaurant was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place that catered to those who valued discretion. Soft lighting, intimate booths, and a menu that promised indulgence. They were seated in a corner, away from prying eyes. For a while they talked about safe topics, books, travel, favorite films. Emma learned that Alexander had grown up in Boston, that he'd built his wealth through real estate investments, and that he'd once dreamed of being an architect. "And you?" he asked, leaning forward. "What made you want to teach?" Emma smiled. "I've always loved stories. The way words can transport you, make you feel understood. Teaching felt like a way to share that with others, especially kids who might not have anyone else telling them their thoughts matter." Alexander's expression softened. "Daniel's lucky to have you." Emma's chest tightened. "He's a good kid, but he's struggling." Alexander's jaw tensed. "I know. I just don't know how to reach him. He used to talk to me, but after the divorce, after his mother, he shut me out." "Have you tried just being present?" Emma asked gently. "Not fixing, not solving, just being there?" Alexander looked at her, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I'm not very good at that." Emma reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You could learn." He turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. "Maybe you could teach me." The air between them shifted, the conversation drifting from words to something deeper, unspoken. When dessert arrived, Emma couldn't even remember what she'd ordered. All she could focus on was the man sitting across from her, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his voice dropped when he spoke about things that mattered. By the time they left the restaurant, the night had grown cool, the city lights glittering like stars. Alexander walked her to his car, but neither of them made a move to get in. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "I don't want this night to end." She looked up at him, her heart racing. "Neither do I." He stepped closer, his hand lifting to cup her cheek. This time, there were no interruptions, no janitors, no voices in the hallway. This time, when he kissed her, it was slow and deliberate, a promise rather than a question. Emma melted into him, her hands gripping the front of his sweater, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he whispered. Emma's breath hitched. "What about Daniel?" "He's staying with my sister for the weekend. It's just us." Emma knew she should say no, knew she should take things slowly, carefully, but every rational thought dissolved under the weight of her desire. Okay. They drove in silence, the tension between them electric. Alexander's penthouse was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern elegance. But Emma barely noticed. The moment the door closed behind them, they were in each other's arms, the kiss from earlier reigniting with a fierce intensity. Clothes were shed in a trail leading to the bedroom, hands exploring, breaths mingling. This time, it wasn't the reckless passion of strangers. It was something deeper, more intimate. They took their time, learning each other, savoring every touch, every sigh. And when it was over, Emma lay in Alexander's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I could get used to this," she murmured. "So could I," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. But as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, reality began to intrude. Emma knew they couldn't hide forever. Eventually, the truth would come out. The question was whether they'd be strong enough to face it together. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Stolen dinners, late-night phone calls, weekends when Daniel was away. It was exhilarating and terrifying, a secret that felt both thrilling and suffocating. At school, Emma maintained her professionalism, treating Daniel with the same care and attention she gave all her students. But she couldn't help noticing the way he watched her sometimes, a curious, almost suspicious look in his eyes. One afternoon after class, Daniel lingered behind. "Miss Collins?" "Yes, Daniel?" He hesitated, then asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Emma's heart stopped. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "Just curious. You seem happier lately." Emma forced a smile. "I'm just enjoying my work." Daniel nodded, but the look in his eyes suggested he didn't entirely believe her. As he left, Emma sank into her chair, her hands shaking. They were running out of time. That evening, she called Alexander. "We need to talk," she said, "about Daniel." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice heavy. "I've been thinking the same thing." They agreed to meet the next day, but before they could, everything unraveled. It was a Friday afternoon, and Emma was in the school parking lot, loading books into her car, when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Collins." She turned to find Daniel standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Daniel." "Hi, is everything okay?" He stared at her for a long moment, then said, "I saw you." Emma's blood ran cold. "Saw me where?" "With my dad. Last weekend. You were leaving his building." Emma's mind raced. She opened her mouth to respond, but Daniel cut her off. "Are you dating him?" The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was the moment she'd been dreading, and she had no idea how to answer. Emma stood frozen in the parking lot, Daniel's question echoing in her ears like a gunshot. "Are you dating him?" Her throat felt tight, her mind scrambling for the right words. Words that wouldn't be a lie, but also wouldn't shatter the fragile trust between teacher and student. "Daniel," she began carefully, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "It's complicated." His jaw clenched, his gray eyes, so much like his father's, filled with a mix of hurt and anger. "That's not an answer." Emma took a breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You're right. It's not. But I think this is a conversation you should have with your father." "Why?" Daniel shot back. "Because you don't want to admit it? Because it's easier to let him explain?" Emma winced. "No. Because he's your dad, and you deserve to hear the truth from him." Not from me. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Emma watched him go, her heart sinking. This was exactly what she'd feared. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed Alexander's number. He answered on the second ring. "Emma? What's wrong?" "Daniel knows," she said, her voice shaking. "He saw me leaving your building. He just confronted me in the parking lot." There was a beat of silence. Then Alexander swore under his breath. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to talk to you." Emma pressed a hand to her forehead, fighting back tears. "Alexander, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful." "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "I'll talk to him. Tonight." Emma nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Okay." Alexander paused, then added, "Emma, whatever happens, we'll figure this out. I promise." But as Emma hung up, she wasn't sure that was a promise he could keep. That evening, Alexander sat in the living room of his penthouse, waiting. Daniel had barely spoken to him since coming home, retreating to his room with a slam of the door. Alexander knew he couldn't put this off. He had to face his son, had to tell him the truth. He knocked on Daniel's door. "Go away," came the muffled reply. "Daniel, we need to talk." "I don't want to talk to you." Alexander exhaled slowly. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please, let me explain." There was a long silence. Then the door opened a crack. Daniel stood there, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. "Fine. Talk." Alexander stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He sat on the edge of Daniel's bed, and after a moment, his son sat down in the desk chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I know you saw Miss Collins leaving the building," Alexander began, "and I know you have questions." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Are you dating her?" "Yes," Alexander said simply. There was no point in lying. Not anymore. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "She's my teacher." Alexander nodded. "I know. And I know how this looks. But it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Daniel demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're dating my teacher, which is," he struggled for words. "It's weird. It's wrong." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, choosing his words carefully. "It didn't start out that way. I met Emma before I knew she was your teacher, before I even knew you'd be in her class." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "When?" Alexander hesitated. "The night of the hotel conference, a few weeks before you started at the new school." Daniel stared at him, processing. "So you had a thing with her, and then she just happened to be my teacher?" Alexander nodded. "I didn't plan it. Neither of us did. And for a while we tried to ignore it. But," he paused, "we couldn't." Daniel shook his head, disbelief and frustration written all over his face. "This is so messed up." "I know," Alexander said quietly, "and I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" Daniel shot back. "For dating her? Or for not telling me?" "Both," Alexander admitted. "I should have been honest with you from the start. But I didn't want to upset you. You've been through so much already, and I wanted to protect you." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but the hurt was still there. "I'm not a kid, Dad. I can handle the truth." Alexander reached out, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're right. And from now on, I'll be honest with you. I promise." Daniel looked at him, his eyes searching. "Do you love her?" The question caught Alexander off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it, considering. I care about her. A lot. More than I expected to." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's a good teacher. She actually listens, you know. Not like the teachers at my old school." Alexander's chest tightened. "I know. She's special." Daniel looked away, his voice quieter now. I don't want to lose another person, Dad. I can't. Alexander's heart broke. You won't. I promise, Daniel. You won't lose me. And you won't lose Emma either. If what we have works out, it'll only mean you'll have one more person who cares about you. Daniel didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. After a long moment, he nodded. Okay. Okay? Alexander repeated, surprised. Daniel shrugged. I mean, it's still weird. But, he hesitated. If she makes you happy, and if she's good to you, then I guess I can try to be okay with it. Relief flooded through Alexander. Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know. Later that night, Alexander called Emma. How did it go? She asked immediately. Better than I expected, Alexander admitted. He's upset, but he's willing to give us a chance. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Really? Really. But Emma, we have to be careful. If anyone at the school finds out, it could cause problems. For you, especially. I know, Emma said, but I don't want to hide anymore. Not from Daniel, and not from anyone else. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then what do you suggest? Emma bit her lip, thinking. We finish out the school year. I'll maintain professionalism with Daniel, and we'll keep things low-key. But after the school year ends, after he's no longer my student, we can be open about this. Alexander considered. That's 6 months. I know. But it's the right thing to do. For Daniel. For my job. For us. Alexander sighed. Okay. 6 months. Emma smiled, even though he couldn't see her. 6 months. And then, no more hiding. The next few months were a delicate balancing act. Emma continued to teach, treating Daniel with the same care and respect she always had. Daniel, for his part, seemed to adjust, though there were still moments when things felt awkward. Alexander attended school events, maintaining a polite distance, but Emma could always feel his gaze on her, warm and reassuring. They saw each other in stolen moments, quiet dinners, and late-night phone calls, counting down the days until they could finally be open. And slowly, carefully, they built something real. Something worth fighting for. When the final day of school arrived, Emma stood in her empty classroom, packing up her things, when a knock sounded at the door. She turned to find Daniel standing there, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Hey, Miss Collins. Hi, Daniel. He stepped inside, looking around the room. I just wanted to say, thanks. For everything this year. Emma smiled. You're welcome. But you did all the hard work. Daniel shrugged. Yeah, but you made it easier. And, he hesitated, I'm glad my dad found you. Emma's throat tightened. Me too. Daniel nodded, then turned to leave, but he paused at the door, glancing back. You're coming to dinner tonight, right? Emma blinked, surprised. Dinner? Daniel grinned. Yeah, Dad's cooking. Or trying to. It's probably going to be a disaster. You should definitely be there. Emma laughed, her heart full. I'll be there. As Daniel left, Alexander appeared in the doorway, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. Ready to stop hiding? He asked, his smile warm. Emma crossed the room, taking his hand. More than ready. And as they walked out together into the bright afternoon sun, Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. No more pretending. No more hiding. Just the truth. Messy and complicated, and absolutely worth it. The summer months passed in a haze of warmth and newfound freedom. For the first time since that night at the hotel, Emma and Alexander could be together openly, without the weight of secrecy pressing down on them. They spent weekends exploring the city, taking Daniel to the beach, sharing quiet dinners on Alexander's penthouse terrace as the sun set over the skyline. Daniel was adjusting, slowly but surely. At first, there had been awkward moments, silences that stretched too long, carefully chosen words. But as time went on, he began to relax around them. He started calling Emma by her first name when they weren't at school. He laughed at Alexander's terrible cooking. He even asked her opinion on books he was reading. One evening in late July, as they sat around the table after dinner, Daniel looked between them and said, "So, are you guys officially together now?" Emma nearly choked on her water. Alexander raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'd say so. Wouldn't you, Emma?" Emma recovered, setting down her glass. "I'd say so too." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Cool. Just maybe don't be all gross and kissy in front of me." Emma laughed. "Deal." Alexander grinned. No promises. Daniel groaned, but there was a lightness in his eyes that hadn't been there in months. For the first time, Emma felt like they were becoming something close to a family. But as the summer drew to a close, reality began to creep back, and the new school year was approaching, and with it, new challenges. Emma was still a teacher at Daniel's school, though he'd be moving up to 9th grade and wouldn't be in her class. Still, the potential for complications remained. One evening, as Emma and Alexander sat on the terrace, watching the city lights flicker to life, she voiced her concerns. "What if people at the school find out? What if they think I gave Daniel preferential treatment? What if it reflects badly on him?" Alexander took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "We've done everything right, Emma. We waited until he was no longer your student. We've been open with him. If anyone has a problem, we'll deal with it together." Emma leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I just don't want him to get hurt." "Neither do I," Alexander said quietly. "But hiding forever isn't the answer either. He's stronger than we think." Emma nodded, though the worry didn't entirely fade. The first week of the new school year arrived, and Emma returned to her classroom, greeting a fresh batch of 8th graders. Daniel was now in high school classes, a different wing of the building, and their paths rarely crossed during the day. But the whispers started almost immediately. "Did you hear? Miss Collins is dating someone. I heard it's a parent. Wait, isn't that, not allowed?" Emma tried to ignore them, focusing on her lessons, but the sidelong glances and hushed conversations were impossible to miss. Then, one afternoon, she was called to the principal's office. Her stomach sank. Mrs. Henderson sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable. "Miss Collins, please, sit down." Emma sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Henderson leaned forward, her gaze direct. "I've received some concerns from parents about your relationship with Alexander Westwood." Emma's heart pounded. What kind of concerns? That it's inappropriate, that it might create a conflict of interest, especially given that his son was your student last year. Emma took a breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "Daniel was my student, yes, but I never gave him preferential treatment. I maintained complete professionalism throughout the school year, and Alexander and I didn't begin our relationship until after the school year ended. Mrs. Henderson studied her." "Is that true?" "Yes," Emma said firmly. "I can provide documentation if needed, records of grades, communications, everything." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "I believe you, Emma. But perception matters, and right now, the perception is causing tension." Emma's chest tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to be careful. No public displays of affection on school grounds. No interactions that could be misconstrued. And if any parent raises an official complaint, there will be an investigation." Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I understand." "Good." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I think you're an excellent teacher. Don't let this derail your career." "Thank you," Emma said quietly. That evening, Emma sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. She knew she needed to tell Alexander, but part of her dreaded the conversation. When she finally called, he answered immediately. "Hey, how was your day?" Emma exhaled shakily. Not great. She told him everything. The whispers, the meeting with Mrs. Henderson, the warning. By the time she finished, her voice was trembling. Alexander was silent for a moment. Then he said, "This is my fault." "What?" "No, Emma, it is. I should have thought about how this would affect you. Your job, your reputation." Emma shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "Alexander, I chose this. I chose you. I don't regret it. But I'm worried," she admitted. "What if it gets worse? What if they force me to leave?" "Then we'll figure it out," Alexander said firmly. "But I'm not going to let you lose everything because of me." Emma closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he promised. "We'll get through this." Over the next few weeks, things settled into an uneasy calm. Emma kept her head down, focused on her work. Alexander attended school events sparingly, and when he did, he was careful to maintain a polite distance. But the strain was taking its toll. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat together in Alexander's living room, Daniel walked in, his expression serious. "We need to talk." Emma and Alexander exchanged a glance. Daniel sat down across from them, his arms crossed. "I heard some kids at school talking." "About you two?" Emma's stomach dropped. "What did they say?" "That it's weird. That Miss Collins must have been playing favorites last year. That maybe she only dated you," he looked at Alexander, "because you're rich." Emma felt as though she'd been slapped. Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's not true." Daniel looked at Emma, his gray eyes searching. "I know, but I wanted to hear it from you." Emma leaned forward, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Daniel, I care about your father because of who he is, not because of his money or his status. And I never, ever gave you preferential treatment in class. You earned every grade you got." Daniel nodded slowly. "I believe you." But he hesitated. "This is hard, for all of us." "I know," Alexander said. "And if you want us to stop, if this is too much, we can—" Daniel cut him off. "No, I don't want you to stop. I want people to see what I see, that you guys actually care about each other." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "We do. More than anything." Daniel looked between them, then sighed. "Okay. Then we figure this out. Together." Alexander reached out, pulling his son into a hug. Together. As the fall turned into winter, things slowly began to improve. The whispers faded. Parents saw that Emma treated all her students fairly, and Daniel, once quiet and withdrawn, became one of their fiercest defenders. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Alexander took Emma's hand. "I have something to ask you." Emma looked up at him, her heart skipping. "What?" He knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Emma's breath caught. Alexander opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Emma Collins, you walked into my life when I least expected it. You've challenged me, changed me, made me believe in second chances. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Emma's face. "Yes. Yes, of course." He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood, pulling her into his arms. From the doorway, Daniel cleared his throat. They turned to find him smiling. "About time," he said. Emma laughed through her tears. Alexander grinned. As they stood together, snow falling softly outside, Emma realized that this messy, complicated, beautiful life was everything she'd ever wanted. The engagement changed everything and nothing all at once. Emma still taught her 8th graders, still graded papers late into the night, still navigated the delicate politics of the school. But now, There was a ring on her finger, a tangible promise that she and Alexander were building something permanent. The news spread quickly. By Monday morning, it seemed like everyone at the school knew. Some teachers offered warm congratulations. Others exchanged skeptical glances. Emma held her head high, refusing to let the judgment dim her happiness. Mrs. Henderson called her in again, this time with a softer expression. "Congratulations, Emma. I heard the news." "Thank you," Emma said, her hand instinctively moving to the ring. Mrs. Henderson leaned back in her chair. "I'll be honest, this situation is unusual, but you've handled it with grace, and your work has remained exemplary. Just continue to be mindful." "I will," Emma promised. That evening, Emma met Alexander and Daniel for dinner at their favorite restaurant, a cozy Italian place with checkered tablecloths and the best carbonara in the city. Daniel was already seated when she arrived, scrolling through his phone. Emma slid into the booth beside him. "Hey." He glanced up, a small smile on his face. "Hey." "Nice rock." Emma laughed, holding up her hand. "Your dad has good taste." Alexander arrived moments later, leaning down to press a kiss to Emma's temple before sitting across from them. "Sorry I'm late. Meeting ran long." Daniel rolled his eyes. "When doesn't it?" Alexander grinned. "Fair point." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. Daniel talked about a history project he was working on. Emma shared a funny story about a student's creative interpretation of Shakespeare, and Alexander recounted a disastrous attempt at negotiating a deal that afternoon. For the first time in months, Emma felt like they'd found their rhythm, like they were a real family. But as dessert arrived, Daniel's expression grew more serious. "So," he said, "when are you guys actually getting married?" Emma and Alexander exchanged a glance. "We haven't set a date yet," Alexander said. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "Just curious. I mean, people are going to talk no matter what. Might as well give them something real to talk about." Emma smiled. "You make a good point." "Besides," Alexander added, "I don't want to wait too long. I've already wasted enough time." Emma reached across the table, taking his hand. "Then let's not waste any more." Over the next few weeks, they began planning. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw unnecessary attention. Just a small ceremony, close friends and family, something intimate and meaningful. Daniel, to Emma's surprise, became deeply involved. He had opinions on everything, from the venue to the music to the food. One afternoon, as Emma and Daniel sat in the living room, looking through potential venues on her laptop, he said, "You know, I'm glad you're marrying my dad." Emma looked up, surprised. "Yeah?" Daniel nodded. "He's been different since he met you." "Happier." "Less." He searched for the word. "Robotic." Emma laughed. "Robotic?" "Yeah. Like before, he was always working, always stressed. But now, he actually smiles. He makes bad jokes. He even tried to dance the other day." Emma's eyes widened. "He danced?" Daniel grinned. "It was terrible. But it was nice." "You're good for him." Emma's throat tightened. "You're good for me too, Daniel." He looked at her, something vulnerable in his eyes. "Really? Really? You've taught me that family doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." Daniel smiled, and for a moment, Emma saw a glimpse of the boy he used to be, before loss and grief had hardened him. "Thanks, Emma. The wedding was set for late spring, in a garden overlooking the river. It was small, just 30 guests, but it was perfect." Emma wore a simple ivory dress, her hair loose, and flowers woven through it. Alexander stood at the altar in a crisp navy suit, his eyes never leaving her as she walked down the aisle. Daniel stood beside him as the best man, his expression proud and emotional. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, a ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd, but no one spoke. And when Alexander said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure. Emma's vows were simple. "I promise to stand by you, even when it's hard, to challenge you, to support you, to love you exactly as you are." Alexander's voice broke slightly as he said his, "I promise to be the man you deserve, to never take you for granted, to fight for us, always." When they kissed, the small crowd erupted in applause, and as they turned to face their guests, hand in hand, Emma felt a sense of completeness she'd never known. The reception was held in the garden, long tables draped in white linen, string lights twinkling overhead. There was laughter, toasts, dancing. Daniel gave a speech that made Emma cry, talking about how Emma had brought light back into their home, how she'd shown him that it was okay to let people in, even after loss. Later, as the sun set and the party wound down, Emma and Alexander stood at the edge of the garden, watching the river shimmer in the fading light. "We did it," Emma said softly. "We did," Alexander agreed, pulling her close. Emma rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You know, I never imagined this. That night at the hotel, I thought it was just a moment. A mistake." Alexander's hand moved to her hair, his fingers threading through the soft strands. "Best mistake I ever made." Emma smiled. "Same." They stood in silence for a while, just holding each other. Then Alexander said, "I have something for you." Emma pulled back, curious. "You already gave me a wedding?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Emma took it, unfolding it carefully. It was a deed. To a house. Her breath caught. "Alexander." "What?" "It's ours," he said. "A place for us, for our family. I know the penthouse has been home, but I wanted something that felt like a new beginning. Something we chose together." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me turn it into a home." Emma threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, always." The school year ended, and Emma decided to take a leave of absence, not because of the whispers or the judgment, but because she wanted time. Time to settle into her new life, to help Daniel transition into high school, to simply breathe. She started writing again, something she hadn't done since college. Short stories, essays, pieces that explored love and loss and second chances. Alexander encouraged her, reading everything she wrote, offering thoughtful feedback. And Daniel, now more confident and open, started bringing friends home. The house, a charming Victorian with a sprawling backyard, filled with laughter and life. One evening, as the three of them sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Daniel said, "This feels right, doesn't it?" Emma looked at Alexander, who smiled. "Yeah," he said, "it really does." Emma reached out, taking both their hands. "We're a family, a real family." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Yeah, we are." And as the stars began to appear, one by one, Emma realized that this messy, unexpected, beautiful life was everything she'd never known she wanted. The night at the hotel had been a beginning, not a mistake. And everything that followed, the complications, the challenges, the love, had led her here, home, where she belonged. A year had passed since the wedding, and life had settled into a comfortable, joyful rhythm. Emma had returned to teaching, but at a different school, one where she could start fresh without the weight of whispers and speculation. She loved her new students, and the change had been exactly what she needed. Alexander's business continued to thrive, but he'd made changes too. He worked fewer hours, delegated more, and made a conscious effort to be present. Not just physically, but emotionally. For Daniel. For Emma. For himself. Daniel was now a sophomore in high school, taller, more confident, and surprisingly social. He'd joined the debate team and made a close group of friends who often gathered at the house on weekends, filling it with music and laughter. Emma loved it. Loved the noise, the energy, the sense that their home was alive. One Saturday morning, Emma woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen. She padded downstairs in her pajamas, her hair still messy from sleep, to find Alexander and Daniel standing at the stove, both wearing matching aprons. She stopped in the doorway, her heart swelling. "What's going on here?" Alexander turned, grinning. "We're making breakfast," Daniel added. "Don't get too excited. Dad's in charge of the eggs, so there's a 50-50 chance they'll be inedible." Alexander shot him a look. "I've improved." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Have you, though?" Emma laughed, crossing the room to pour herself a cup of coffee. "I'm sure it'll be great." They ate together at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows, and Emma felt a deep sense of contentment. This was the life she'd built, the life she'd chosen. After breakfast, Daniel disappeared to his room to study, and Emma and Alexander settled on the couch, her feet tucked under his legs, a book in her lap. "You're quiet," Alexander observed, running his hand absently along her ankle. Emma looked up, smiling. "Just thinking." About how different things are now, how good they are. Alexander's expression softened. "They are good, aren't they?" Emma nodded. "But sometimes I worry that it's too good, that something's going to go wrong." Alexander shifted, pulling her closer. "Nothing's perfect, Emma. We've had our share of challenges, and we'll have more, but we'll face them together." Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "I know. I just don't want to lose this." "You won't," he said firmly. "I won't let you." Later that afternoon, Emma was in the backyard, tending to the garden she'd started in the spring, when Daniel came outside. He sat down on the steps, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" Emma looked up, brushing dirt off her hands. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Meeting my dad the way you did? I mean, it's kind of a weird story." Emma sat back on her heels, considering. "Honestly? No, I don't regret it. It wasn't conventional, and it definitely wasn't easy, but," she paused, "it brought me here. To this life. To you." Daniel smiled. "Good. Because I don't regret it either." Emma's chest tightened. "That means a lot, Daniel." He stood, stretching. "I'm heading to Jake's house. I'll be back for dinner." "Have fun," Emma called. As he walked away, she couldn't help but marvel at how much he'd grown, not just physically, but emotionally. He was still the quiet, thoughtful boy she'd first met, but now there was a lightness to him, a sense of peace. That evening, as the three of them sat down for dinner, Alexander cleared his throat. "I have some news." Emma and Daniel both looked up. "I've been offered a position," Alexander continued, "a partnership with a firm in New York." Emma's stomach dropped. "New York?" Alexander nodded. "It's a huge opportunity. More money, more influence, more everything." But, he paused, looking between them. It would mean relocating. Daniel's fork clattered onto his plate. "Wait, you mean move? To New York?" Alexander nodded again. "I haven't made a decision yet. I wanted to talk to both of you first." Emma's mind raced. New York. It was a world away from the life they'd built here. A different city, a different pace, a different everything. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Alexander met her gaze. "Honestly, I don't know. A year ago I would have jumped at this. But now," he looked around the table, "I have more to consider." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression conflicted. "I mean, I'd miss my friends, and my school. But," he hesitated, "if it's what you want, Dad, I can deal with it." Alexander reached across the table, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "What I want is for us to be happy. All of us." Emma took a breath. "Then let's talk about it. Really talk about it." They spent the next hour discussing the pros and cons, the opportunities in New York versus the stability they had here, the excitement of a new adventure versus the comfort of home. By the end of the conversation, no decision had been made, but Emma felt closer to Alexander and Daniel than ever, because they were figuring it out together. A few days later, Alexander came home with a smile on his face. I turned it down. Emma looked up from her laptop, surprised. "What?" "The New York offer." I turned it down. Daniel, who was sprawling on the couch playing a video game, paused. "Seriously?" Alexander nodded. "This is our home. You guys are my priority. And honestly, I don't need more money or influence. I have everything I need right here." Emma crossed the room, wrapping her arms around him. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said, kissing the top of her head. Daniel set down his controller, standing and joining the hug. "Thanks, Dad." For a moment, the three of them stood there, holding each other, and Emma felt tears prick her eyes. This was what mattered. Not the accolades or the opportunities or the money. Just this. Love. Family. Home. As the months turned into another year, life continued to unfold in unexpected and beautiful ways. Emma published a collection of essays, small but well-received, about love, loss, and second chances. Alexander started mentoring young entrepreneurs, finding fulfillment in giving back. And Daniel thrived, growing into a thoughtful, compassionate young man. One evening, as Emma and Alexander sat on the porch, watching the sunset, he said, "Do you ever think about that night? At the hotel?" Emma smiled. "Sometimes." "Why?" Alexander shrugged. I never imagined that one impulsive decision would lead to all this." Emma took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did." "So am I," he said, his voice soft. They sat in silence, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, and Emma realized that this was her happily ever after. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real, messy, beautiful. Hers. 2 more years passed, and with them came new milestones, new challenges, and new joys. Daniel graduated high school with honors and was accepted to several prestigious universities. The decision of where to go had been agonizing for him, but in the end, he chose a school only 2 hours away. Close enough to visit, far enough to grow. The day they dropped him off at college, Emma stood in his dorm room, helping him unpack boxes, while Alexander assembled a desk that, according to the instructions, should have taken 20 minutes, but was now on hour 2. "You know," Daniel said, pulling books from a box, "I never thought I'd be okay with leaving." Emma looked up. "And now? Now I think I'm ready." "But," he paused, "I'm going to miss you guys." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "We're going to miss you too. But we're so proud of you." Daniel smiled, then glanced at Alexander, who was muttering under his breath about incomprehensible Swedish furniture instructions. "I'm proud of him too. For everything." Emma crossed the room, pulling Daniel into a hug. "You're going to do amazing things, I know it." When they finally left, Emma cried the entire drive home. Alexander held her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "It's the end of an era," Emma said, wiping her cheeks. "No," Alexander corrected gently. "It's the beginning of a new one." And he was right. With Daniel away at school, Emma and Alexander had the house to themselves for the first time since they'd married. It was strange at first, the quiet, the lack of teenage energy filling the rooms. But slowly, they adjusted. They took up ballroom dancing, something Emma had always wanted to try, and Alexander had resisted until she bribed him with the promise of his favorite dessert every week. They traveled, taking weekend trips to places they'd never been, exploring new cities and cultures. And they reconnected, in ways both big and small. Late-night conversations on the porch, lazy Sunday mornings in bed, cooking elaborate meals together and laughing when they inevitably burned something. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Emma curled up against Alexander. He said, "I've been thinking." "About?" Emma asked, looking up at him. "About us. About our future." Emma's heart skipped. "Okay." Alexander took her hand. "We've built this incredible life together. We've weathered storms, celebrated victories, raised a son. And I don't want it to stop here." Emma smiled. "I don't think it's stopping." "No," he agreed. "But I want more. I want to keep growing with you. Keep discovering new things. Keep falling in love with you over and over again." Emma's throat tightened. "You're very romantic tonight." He grinned. "I have my moments." Then his expression grew more serious. "I was thinking, maybe we could start a foundation. Together." Emma blinked. "A foundation?" Alexander nodded. "Something focused on education. Scholarships for kids who need them. Programs that support teachers. You have the passion and the knowledge, and I have the resources. We could make a real difference." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. "Alexander, that's incredible." He smiled. "So you're in?" She threw her arms around him. "I'm in." Over the next year, they built the foundation from the ground up. It was challenging, exhausting, and incredibly fulfilling. They worked side by side, Emma's vision and Alexander's business acumen creating something truly impactful. They awarded scholarships to deserving students. They funded programs that provided resources to under-resourced schools. They partnered with organizations that supported teachers, offering grants and professional development opportunities. And with each success, Emma felt a deep sense of purpose. This was what she was meant to do. Not just teach, but create lasting change. One afternoon, as Emma sat in their home office, reviewing applications for the next round of scholarships, her phone rang. It was Daniel. "Hey, sweetheart," she answered, smiling. "How are classes?" "Good," he said, but there was something in his tone that made Emma sit up straighter. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I wanted to tell you something." "Okay," Emma said, her heart beating a little faster. "I met someone." Emma's breath caught. "Oh?" "Her name's Lily. She's in my philosophy class. She's smart and funny," and he paused. "I really like her." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure why. "That's wonderful, Daniel. I'm so happy for you." "Thanks," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I wanted you to be the first to know." "Well, you and Dad." Emma laughed. "I'm honored." They talked for a while longer, Daniel sharing details about Lily, his classes, his plans for the semester. When they finally hung up, Emma sat back in her chair, a soft smile on her face. Alexander appeared in the doorway. "What's got you smiling like that?" Emma looked up. Daniel met someone. Alexander's eyebrows rose. "Really?" Emma nodded. "Her name's Lily. He sounds happy." A slow smile spread across Alexander's face. "Good for him." Emma stood, crossing the room to wrap her arms around Alexander. "Our boy's all grown up." Alexander held her close. "He is. And it's because of you." Emma pulled back, looking up at him. "Us. It's because of us." That night, as they lay in bed, Emma stared at the ceiling, her mind wandering. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" she asked. "If you hadn't walked into that bar that night, if I hadn't been sitting alone?" Alexander was quiet for a moment. "All the time." Emma turned to look at him. "And I'm grateful every single day that I did. That you were." Emma smiled, resting her head on his chest. "Me too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future holding them close. The years continued to unfold. Daniel graduated college, brought Lily home to meet them, and eventually proposed to her in the same garden where Emma and Alexander had been married. Emma cried through the entire engagement party. The foundation grew, impacting thousands of students and teachers. Emma wrote another book, this one a memoir about second chances and the unexpected ways love finds us. Alexander continued to mentor and invest, but always made time for what mattered most: family. And through it all, Emma and Alexander remained each other's constant. They argued sometimes, laughed often, and loved deeply. One evening, decades after that fateful night at the hotel, Emma and Alexander sat on the porch of their home, now older, grayer, but no less in love. Grandchildren played in the yard, Daniel and Lily watching from nearby, and the air was filled with the sounds of life and joy. Emma reached for Alexander's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You know," she said softly, "I wouldn't change a thing." Alexander looked at her, his gray eyes still as piercing as they'd been all those years ago. Neither would I. They sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And Emma knew, with absolute certainty, that this life they'd built from a single, impulsive night was her greatest masterpiece. The years had been kind to them, but they had also left their mark. Alexander's hair was now silver, his face lined with the wisdom of time and experience. Emma's once dark hair had lightened to a soft gray, and laugh lines framed her eyes. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they'd been that night in the hotel bar, still felt that same pull, that same undeniable connection. It was a warm afternoon in late spring, the kind of day that begged to be spent outside. Emma sat in the garden, a blanket spread beneath her, surrounded by photo albums she'd been organizing for weeks. Pictures of Daniel as a child, of their wedding day, of holidays and birthdays, and ordinary moments that had become extraordinary through the lens of time. Alexander emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. He handed one to Emma and settled down beside her, groaning slightly as his knees protested. "Getting old is not for the weak," he muttered. Emma laughed, taking a sip of her drink. "We're not old. We're seasoned." Alexander smirked. "Is that what we're calling it?" Emma leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a while, flipping through the albums, reminiscing. "Remember this?" Emma said, pointing to a photo of Daniel's high school graduation. "He looks so young." "He was young," Alexander said. "We all were." Emma traced her finger over the image, then turned the page. There was a picture from their wedding, Emma in her ivory dress, Alexander in his navy suit, both of them beaming at the camera. "Look at us," she said softly. "We had no idea what we were getting into." Alexander chuckled. "No, we didn't. But we figured it out." Emma looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you have any regrets?" His expression grew serious. "About us? Never. About anything else?" He considered. Maybe some business decisions. A few arguments I wish I'd handled differently. But when it comes to you, to our life together? Not a single regret. Emma smiled, her heart full. "Good. Because neither do I." They continued looking through the albums until the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. Then Alexander said, "I have something for you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "It's not my birthday." "I know. But I saw this, and I thought of you." He pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. Emma took it, curious, and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with her initials. Alexander, it's beautiful. I know you've been talking about writing again, he said. I thought maybe this could be a place to start. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She ran her hand over the smooth leather, then looked up at him. Thank you. For everything. Not just the journal, but everything. Alexander cupped her face in his hands. Thank you for saying yes. That night in the bar, when I asked you to pretend. Thank you for taking a chance. Emma laughed, even as tears slipped down her cheeks. Best decision I ever made. They kissed, soft and slow, a kiss that held decades of love and commitment. When they pulled apart, Emma rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he replied. Always. As the stars began to appear overhead, they packed up the photo albums and headed inside. The house was quiet now, the grandchildren gone home. Daniel and Lily returned to their own lives. But it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. That night, as Emma lay in bed beside Alexander, she opened the journal he'd given her. The first page was blank, waiting to be filled. She picked up a pen and began to write. It started with a night I never planned. A stranger in a hotel bar, a whispered proposition. Pretend you're with me. I didn't know then that those 4 words would change my life, that the man who spoke them would become my everything. Our story wasn't conventional. It was messy, complicated, and at times, incredibly difficult. But it was ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. She paused, thinking about all the years that had passed, all the moments that had brought them to this point. Then she continued, Love isn't always easy. It requires courage, compromise, and a willingness to be vulnerable. But when you find the right person, when you find your person, it's worth every challenge. Alexander Westwood walked into my life when I least expected it, and he became my greatest adventure. Emma closed the journal, setting it on the nightstand. Beside her, Alexander stirred, reaching for her hand even in his sleep. She laced her fingers through his, feeling the familiar weight of his wedding band against her skin. And in that moment, Emma knew that this was her happily ever after. Not because it was perfect, not because there had been no struggles, but because it was real, because they had chosen each other every single day for all these years, and they would continue to choose each other for all the days to come. The end of one story, the beginning of forever. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.